Councilmember, we are all set on the staff side. You may begin when you're ready.
Good afternoon, all. I'm Robert White, Council Member at Large and Chair of the Committee on Government Operations and Facilities. Today is Monday, July 11th, 2022, and we're meeting remotely via Zoom. The time is now 12:04 p.m., and I'm calling to order this public hearing of the committee. Today, we are reviewing one bill, Bill 24-509, the Inspector General Oversight Consistency Amendment Act of 2021. I introduced this bill along with Council Members Silverman, McDuffie, Nadeau, Pinto, Bonds, Lewis George, and Che on November 10th of last year, and it was referred to this committee for review on November 16th. The council passed substantively identical emergency and temporary legislation, which currently remains in effect until October 7th. We anticipate maintaining those provisions in effect until we can pass permanent legislation. The purpose of the legislation is to establish the authority of the Office of the Inspector General to undertake reviews and investigations of the District of Columbia Housing Authority without a prior request of the council. This authority is critical because the Housing Authority is an agency in crisis. Over the last few years, we've seen repeated indications of mismanagement. The Housing Authority Board of Commissioners has been fractured by behavior, conflicts of interest, and resignations under pressure. The agency it oversees has not fared any better, with billions of dollars in backlog maintenance, thousands of residents living in unacceptably poor conditions, thousands more on an endless waiting list for housing, all while our DCHA public housing stock is in decline. DCHA projects have been mismanaged and delayed, and promises made to our residents have been broken repeatedly. Reporting has called into question almost every aspect of housing authority operations, from contracting practices to an abusive police culture. Given this reality, it is perhaps unsurprising that the Housing Authority has been the subject of multiple investigations from various agencies. As many of these issues were coming to it last year, it became clear that the Housing Authority had an unusual degree of insulation from oversight by the Inspector General. Under pre-existing law, the OIG has the authority to initiate audits and investigations of all district government agencies, including all independent agencies. The law giving the OIG that authority was effective on April 5th, 2000. 1 month later, on May 9th, 2000, the council passed a separate piece of omnibus legislation permitting the OIG to undertake reviews and investigations of the Housing Authority, but only, quote, as requested by the council, end quote. The legislative record doesn't have really any information on how that one phrase was supposed to work with the legislation the council passed the prior month, giving the IG authority to otherwise investigate all independent agencies without a request from the council. Last October, the Inspector General let members of the Housing Committee know that there was a reason for them to conduct investigation of the Housing Authority. The Inspector General also sent us a letter describing how the unique statutory framework for the investigations of the Housing Authority presented the office with, quote, an inherent conflict with our statutory requirement to conduct independent investigations, end quote. Specifically, the law and audit standards require that the OIG set the scope and timing of its investigations to address issues as they come up, and that they do so with confidentiality to protect their investigation. That is impossible under the current permanent law that requires a prior council request. That's why I moved emergency and temporary legislation to subject the authority to the same review of the Inspector General as exists for almost every other agency of government. And that was the genesis of this permanent legislation that we are reviewing today. Before we turn to public witnesses, I want to recognize my colleague at large council member, Alyssa Silverman. Do you have an opening statement, council member?
I do. Councilmember White, good afternoon to you and to everyone tuning in. First, I want to thank you for holding this hearing, and I do hope we can move this legislation with urgency, because I think it is called for in this case. Councilmember White, you gave an excellent summary of why we are here. I just want to add in something that I say every hearing and every time a bill comes up with the Housing Authority. The Housing Authority is an absolutely vital agency for our city in making DC more equitable and just. It had the Housing Authority through its Housing Authority communities, the public housing communities, as well as its role in administering vouchers, our housing subsidy vouchers, is absolutely critical. And questions have been raised again and again about operations at the Housing Authority. We saw the resignation of Board Chairman Neil Albert, as you mentioned, about 9 months ago. And repeatedly, there have been questions raised about the agency's operations. And we need to have this agency working properly and without political meddling. So as you mentioned, what this bill would do would remove, I think it's basically 5 words to allow the Inspector General to investigate allegations without council approval. And I think that is absolutely the right thing to do here. We need our investigative agency on the executive side to be able to do the proper due diligence and investigations of allegations about corruption and other issues at the Housing Authority. Let's see. You mentioned it, I believe, Councilmember White, but I had written a letter that you and all the members of the Housing Committee on the council, Councilmember Bonds, Councilmember Pinto, Councilmember McDuffie, signed onto, saying that we need to give OIG the authority it needs to start investigating these allegations. And then you stepped up, and again, I want to thank you, Councilmember White, by drafting this bill that clearly puts DCHA investigations under OIG's independent investigative power. I'll say it one more time because I took a class, Councilmember White, with the it was actually an acting class. We act a little bit, I guess, on the dais, and one of the points that was emphasized is you should always say, if you want to make a point, you should say it 3 times. So I think I've said it twice already, but this bill is just common sense, and it is urgently needed. So thank you again, Councilmember White, for introducing this bill and holding this hearing so that the OIG doesn't have to sit on its hands, or there's not political interference at the council, so that the OIG can't do its investigations. And I look forward to voting for this bill very soon so OIG can move expeditiously. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Council Member Silverman. As you laid out in your statement, you have been just a steadfast leader and partner on this issue, and I appreciate it. Looking forward to getting this bill passed. With that, let us turn to, we have one public witness before us today, and just so everyone knows the ground rules, public witnesses have 4 minutes to testify. When I call you, and I'll call you now, Alex Stein, you're going to drop out of the hearing momentarily. You'll come back in as a witness and can unmute yourself at that time. So our public witness, Alex Stein, will give you a minute to get queued up.
Hey guys, thank you for having me today. And we have a serious corruption problem with our housing authority. I've met many people that have lost vouchers, lost their ability to even have any sort of, housing or any sort of life. And now they've had to turn to a life of drugs, a life of prostitution, a life of crime. So it has a domino effect when you put these people out on the street. It makes them, less than their normal brothers and sisters. They can't actually live a happy life. And we have a very affluent place where we can support these people. Now, I work for a charity here that helps people struggling with drugs and alcohol addiction. Well, I recently met a single mother that lost everything. She lost her housing authority. She lost all of her vouchers. She even lost her car. And she told me this whimsical story. At first was sounded, a little wild, but this is, a highlight of the corruption in the housing authority. She told me that she one night went and had a party with Hunter Biden and that she was, doing crack cocaine with him, drinking with him, hanging out with him all night. And of course, I didn't believe her at all. I said, why would the president's son be doing crack cocaine with you? And then come to find out, she went to her dealer. She got a bunch of drugs. She was fronted the drugs. She did the drugs with Hunter all night. And then she never paid back the dealer. The dealer ended up vandalizing her car and ended up beating her up pretty bad, putting her in the hospital. And then she ended up not being able to renew her voucher and losing her housing. Now, when she went to the press and the media about this, they didn't believe her. When she came to our charity, of course, I didn't believe her. But with the recent leaks of the 4chan documents, I actually saw her in a bathroom with Hunter Biden weighing crack cocaine. So I think that we need to bring this up, that there is there's a corruption all the way to the top, to even the president's office, that is protecting, Hunter Biden, because there's homeless people that are smoking crack with him and losing their housing vouchers. Now, I don't care if it's the president's son, the president's daughter, they should not be able to make a single mother homeless. This woman, she was working hard. She worked at a grocery store and she ended up losing everything, all because of one night, one sexual tryst with Hunter Biden. She said that he took her phone, they took pictures of it. And now these are the most vulnerable people. So if you have people that are in our White House that are taking advantage of people that have drug addictions, that have mental health issues, then we really need to have the Inspector General look into the housing authority, because we know that it's full of corruption, because it goes all the way to the top. And that's the problem, is I don't think the Inspector General will do enough to expose the corruption within the housing authority, because I've heard multiple problems of people that were, not vaccinated being able to get housing authority, then people that were vaccinated living inside together, people getting COVID, people spreading it, people dying. So we really need to actually look into the problem, because it is actually a cancerous problem that's building, that goes all the way to the top. So I don't know if the Inspector General has the authority to even look into what happened with Hunter Biden and his drug use with this woman, but she deserves to live her life. She shouldn't have to be subjugated to a life less than, on the streets, turning tricks, being a prostitute. That's the last thing we need for our people, especially here in DC. This is the nation's capital. America goes the way of DC. So it's our responsibility to help these people. It's your responsibility, Robert, to help these people as a council member. And I know, and I understand that these are high important people that we have to expose, like Hunter Biden smoking crack cocaine with this woman, turning her into a prostitute, getting her in trouble with her drug dealer. These are all serious issues. And we have a problem, 108,000 drug overdose deaths this year, the highest number on record. So what happens is we have a housing authority issue because we have a drug addiction issue. So it is a domino effect. Once these people get hooked on the drugs, then they cannot live a normal life. Then they cannot have the opportunities to work, to live, to shop, to do the things that you and I can do. Now, obviously, none of us have a drug addiction. I used to have a drug problem, and that's why I got into this charity and I turned my life around. And now I'm totally clean and I help other people. But when I hear these stories time after time of people getting the opportunity to have housing and then losing it because of somebody in power not liking the way that they do something, because of an innocuous thing that they shouldn't be held responsible for. People are very vulnerable. So when you have people in power like Hunter Biden, Joe Biden's son, offering to do crack cocaine, promising these people a better life, promising them trips to, Nantucket, to all over the world, to hang out with Barack Obama, to hang out with Malia Obama. These are issues that they're going after the most vulnerable. So I really need to take it I take it very personal when people like you guys that are actually trying to do good, but that are getting, backdoored by people in power. And that's why the corruption has to stop. That's why we have to have it where you guys do not need the Inspector General whatsoever at all to be able to authorize. You guys shouldn't have to authorize for the Inspector General to do inspections. That's their job. That's their job, to sniff out corruption. And the corruption goes all the way to the top. Now there's pictures. If you go on Twitter, you type in 4chan, Hunter Biden. Yes.
We're about a minute over your time.
Okay.
And I didn't want to cut you off. Yeah.
I appreciate that. Thank you guys so much for bringing awareness. I really think you guys are doing a great job.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you being with us.
Thank you.
Councilmember Silverman, did you have questions for the witness? She may have had to jump into another meeting. Here we are.
No, I do not.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stein. I appreciate you being with us, and thank you for your testimony. We're going to welcome our government witness. At this time, I want to recognize Inspector General Daniel Lucas. We'll give him a moment to get queued up. General Lucas, welcome.
Good afternoon, Councilman White, Councilman Silverman. Good to see you.
Good to see you as well. As you know, you've been with our committee many times. It is the practice of our committee to put our government witnesses under oath. Is there anyone else from your team that may be answering questions?
No, just myself.
Excellent. Well, I'd ask that you raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you are about to provide to the Committee on Government Operations and Facilities is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you so much. You can begin your and when you're ready.
Good afternoon, Chairperson White and members of the committee. I'm Daniel W. Lucas, Inspector General for the District of Columbia. I'm pleased to appear virtually before the committee to discuss Bill 24-0509, the Inspector General Oversight Consistency Act of 2021. Before I provide testimony on the subject bill, I would like to state that the Office of Inspector General has several ongoing matters at the District of Columbia Housing Authority, and it would be inappropriate to provide any updates at this point. I appreciate your understanding in needing to protect the integrity of our oversight work. Now, I believe it will be helpful to understand the legislative evolution of DCA and the resulting need for this legislation to become permanent. In the early 1990s, DCHA's predecessor, the District's Department of Public and Assisted Housing, DPAH, suffered from scandals of bribery, corruption, mismanagement, and instability. In 1993, the District of Columbia Superior Court appointed a special master to review DPAH's operations. At the special master's recommendations, the court ultimately appointed a receiver to manage DPAH. Shortly after the appointment of the receiver, the council considered legislation to dissolve DPAH and create an independent agency to address the shifting priorities and constantly changing leadership at DPAH. In 1995, the legislation passed and established DCHA as an independent agency within the district government. In 1999, DCHA was on track to overcome the court-ordered receivership. At that time, the receiver worked with the council on legislation to ensure that, under post-receivership, DCHA will remain a financially and operationally sound independent entity of the government of the District of Columbia. Among other enhancements, the introduced legislation created an Office of Audit and Compliance within DCHA. The Office of Audit and Compliance will conduct independent fiscal and management audits of DCHA's operations, other special audits, assignments, and civil and criminal investigations. As council deliberated the proposed legislation, a section entitled Intergovernmental Cooperation was added, which placed limitations on the OIG's ability to independently initiate and conduct investigations at DCHA. To initiate an investigation, the OIG would first have to receive a request from the council. The council enacted the legislation in early 2000, and shortly after, the court terminated DCHA's receivership. Since 2000, the district's relationship with DCHA has evolved considerably. In FY 2006, the district began providing DCHA with local dollars to subsidize operations due to anticipated losses in federal operating funding. The subsidy has grown from $10 million in FY 2006 to more than $182.5 million in the proposed FY 23 budget. In addition to the district's subsidy to DCHA's operations, in FY 21, the district established the Public Housing and Structural Transformation, or FAST, capital account. FAST serves as a district funding source for the development and rehabilitation of DCHA's real estate portfolio. FAST projected 6-year capital budget has increased from $65 million in FY 2021 to $211 million in the proposed FY 2023 budget. Since FY 2006 through FY 2023, the proposed budget, the district will have provided over $1.3 billion in local dollars to DCHA to help subsidize its operations and capital improvements. Since starting in 2020, the OIG's hotline saw an increase in complaints regarding DCHA's programs and operations. During this time, the OIG attempted to work with DCHA to obtain facts relative to these complaints. Despite the OIG's statutory access to district government records, including those belonging to independent agencies, DCHA sought to delay or otherwise impede turning over requested information to my office. Given the complaints made to the OIG risk going unadjudicated, in late FY 21, I began to notify the Council's Committee on Housing and Executive Administration of various matters that the OIG could not address due to limitations in our statute. After the OIG's notification, the Committee on Housing and Executive Administration chairperson and committee members made a series of requests for investigations into the matters we brought to its attention. Understanding that this is a protracted process which risks compromising the integrity of any investigations, the Council introduced emergency and temporary legislation that removed the need for the Council to request the OIG investigate matters at DCHA. Today's hearing seeks to make this legislation permanent and allow the OIG to independently conduct investigations relating to the programs and operations of district government departments and agencies, including district agencies, independent agencies. To be clear, I am in favor of this legislation. Like other district entities, including independent agencies, the legislation allows the OIG to exercise its statutory independence to initiate investigations of alleged misconduct at DCHA, while at the same time reducing the risk of compromising the integrity of any investigative work. In conclusion, Chairperson White and members of the committee, the solutions found in Bill 24-0509 will help permanently bridge the oversight gap within the district government. Given the historic local dollar investment in DCHA's operations and capital improvements, the district government and residents should be concerned about how these resources are being used. And if any malfeasance in DCHA's programs and operations is alleged, the matter will be promptly addressed and adjudicated. If the district finds itself in a situation where DCHA's internal oversight mechanisms are conflicted, the Council is unable to address the issues, or a matter falls outside of the federal government's oversight purview, the OIG is the only entity left in the district government that will be able to investigate allegations of criminal, civil, or administrative misconduct within DCHA's programs and operations. Enacting this permanent legislation will bolster the integrity of the district's oversight system and ultimately benefit the district government and its residents. This concludes my prepared testimony, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, General Lucas. We have been joined by committee member Christina Henderson. Councilmember Henderson, welcome. Do you have a statement or just questions?
Here to listen.
Excellent. Well, then I will jump in. We'll do 7-minute rounds. And I think sort of the state of play is that there's really not a clear legislative record to help us understand why the Housing Authority was moved outside of the scope of the Office of the Inspector General's jurisdiction. So we don't know why it was done. No one has come to this hearing or or sort of let us know outside of this hearing why this should continue. And so there's no opposition. As General Lucas said at the end of your statement, this is good government. This is accountability. What this legislation would do is really put the Housing Authority on par with other agencies that would put them under the purview of the Inspector General without the Inspector General having to come to the council for approval. In fact, coming to the council for approval really jeopardizes the OIG's process because they have to essentially sort of tip their hand or show their hand rather when they are looking into possible wrongdoing or agency operations. And I know that there's not much you can say about any current investigations at the Housing Authority. So if there are any questions that you can't answer, I understand, and I don't plan to ask questions really about the operations of those investigations. But is there anything that you can say, General Lucas? So the council approved your authority late last year to investigate the Housing Authority without prior request. And we did that through emergency and temporary legislation late last year. Is there anything you can say about how you are or are not using that authority at this point?
What I can say, council member, is that all of the matters that have been referred to this office by the council are currently under review, investigation, and/or audit.
Okay. And you sent us a letter to this effect, but for the record, and you mentioned some of this in your statement, but if you could just explain for the general public, why does requiring council approval or for you to initiate an investigation of the Housing Authority, why does that cause problems for you?
Thank you for that question, Councilmember White. Like any of the investigations that we do, be it in DCHA or any other district agency, we are required to protect the confidentiality of anyone involved in a particular investigation. At the onset, we don't know who's involved with what. So in order to protect any investigation, what you want to do is communicate with as few people as possible. And those people that you do communicate with, it's only to further the investigation. Now, if we have to ask another entity for permission to conduct an investigation, we would obviously have to disclose enough information for that decision to be made. This is why this whole situation with DCHA being carved out of our investigative authority is so unusual. There is no other entity, particularly independent entity within the district that's outside of our authority. So if the district wants to have investigations that have integrity, that get to the bottom, any kind of misfeasance or malfeasance, we have to be able to independently do that work.
So are there limitations on your authority with respect to, say, the chief office of the chief financial officer or the office of the inspector general, which are two significant independent agencies?
Now, the OCFO is a great example. Like DCHA, they also have an internal oversight function. That internal oversight function does not preclude me from conducting any audit, any inspection, or any investigation within that agency. What actually happens is we work with those internal oversight entities to make sure any matters that arise are either addressed by the internal oversight function, or if it's within my purview, is addressed by my office.
I appreciate that. I mean, I think those give pretty clear examples of why this is really outside the scope of reason. So with this legislation, and then we are also considering the law enforcement authorities legislation. Is there any other, are there any other legislative changes that you need for your work at the Housing Authority to be successful other than this bill and maybe the law enforcement authorities bill?
I think those two pieces of legislation would make the agency whole. It would apportion to us exactly the authorities that we need, no more, no less. It would allow us to conduct investigation from beginning to end without seeking any sort of outside support or authorities. And that's exactly what the district needs, because there is no other entity within the district that's required or responsible to do this kind of work.
And can you say, sort of without compromising the investigation, you mentioned some difficulties in the past getting information you need from the Housing Authority. Since the passage of the temporary and permanent legislation late last year, is OIG able to get whatever information or data it needs from the Housing Authority?
Yes, we are able to work through those issues with the current authority that we have. We're not encountering any issues that are unlike anything that we would encounter in any other investigation.
I have a few more questions, but let me turn to my colleague, Councilmember Silverman.
Thank you so much, Councilmember White. Good afternoon to you, Inspector General. Good to see you. Councilmember White asked almost all the questions I did or I wanted to. So great job, Councilmember White. But let me just make sure I understand I have clarity. So we passed this legislation on an emergency and temporary basis. This is the permanent. Is there anything else that you would need, Inspector General Lucas, in order to do the investigations necessary at the Housing Authority, or is this legislation sufficient?
This legislation is sufficient to deal with the problems that are before us. But like Councilmember White discussed, we have some additional legislation dealing with our law enforcement authority, which essentially recognizes us, as law enforcement authority within the district, like any other law enforcement authority, to conduct law enforcement activities within our jurisdiction. Without that designation, we kind of have to stop short at the district's boundaries.
Okay, and so is that being taken care of through this legislation or another piece of legislation?
We're working with Councilmember White's office on that legislation. Okay,
got it. Then I know Councilmember White delved into the legislative history, but I didn't quite. I tried to follow along your answer. The issue is that are these 5 words that you may undertake investigations, and in the law it was as requested by the council. Do you know where that came from and when that got put into place?
I do not. We scoured the record, and we could not find any logical reason to have that particular carve out. Especially since the rest of the district, there's no other entity that has that carve out. And then obviously what that means, is this void, of oversight in DCHA. So we're not sure exactly how that came.
Okay, so just to put a fine point on it, this exception that you needed authority from the council is unique to DCHA and only DCHA, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and as
that we know of, Councilman.
Okay.
We've not encountered it with any other district entities in my 8 years here as the Inspector General.
Well, I'll go over again a little bit of the ground that Councilmember White went over. So the other independent agencies, let's say like Councilmember White said OCFO, for example, like DC Water, do you have authority to investigate at DC Water?
To the extent that anything that we're investigating stems from district resources.
I see. Okay. Not that I have any reason to suspect, I was just trying to think of another independent agency which receives, which is in our budget. Okay, so this is very unique. It's a mystery why council authority was needed. And this will sufficiently correct that issue.
Yes.
Those are all my questions. Thank you very much, Inspector General, and thank you, Councilmember White.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Silverman. Anderson, do you have questions this round?
I do, and I'll be very brief because, like you said, or like Councilmember Silverman said, you did such a great job, Mr. Chair, on your first round. I honestly was hoping to actually glean from this hearing a little bit of the background here, how we got here, and it is, I think, telling in terms of there not really being a record in terms of what happened here. And in fact, my staff and I were working on something else, and we went to click to see, okay, let's find the committee report. And it was like 2 pages and nobody describes. And so I think it just kind of underscores on that front. Mr. Inspector General, I do have a question in terms of, first off, I'm glad we did this on emergency and temporary and that we're going back to do this on the permanent basis. But just to help in terms of the public, because I feel like there was a period of time here where I think lots of people have questions about DCHA's operations. So can you explain in terms of your office's authority to do retrospective lookbacks on independent agencies? Does it have to come from a specific complaint, or do you all in your rotation, is this something that you can add to your agenda?
For the short answer is yes, we can do retrospective looks. Just to kind of give you some insight into our process. What we do is every year we conduct a risk assessment. And it starts with the publication of the budget book. We do a risk assessment. We look at 9 or 10 different variables that tell us where the biggest risks are in the district. And from there, we develop an annual plan of things we look at either through audit or inspection. But we also continually look across the district for risks that pop up. They can be manifest in a news report. It can manifest from a request from a council member. It can manifest from a hotline complaint, or it can manifest from some of the data analytic work that my team does. So when something pops up that requires our immediate attention, we will devote resources to it. If it doesn't require our immediate attention, we will hold it to the side for our annual risk assessment to perhaps add to an annual plan.
Okay. Okay, I think that's good to know in terms of process. Do you currently have an inquiry out, or is your team currently working on a case as it pertains to DCHA?
We are looking into several matters in DCHA.
Okay, that is all I'll ask. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, for holding this hearing today. Thank you, Mr. Inspector General.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councilmember Henderson. General Lucas, we are thorough here with this legislation. So the statute references the District of Columbia Housing Authority. Is it sufficiently clear that your investigatory authority also applies to the Housing Authority Board of Commissioners?
So in my mind, the DC Housing Authority includes its Board of Commissioners. The Board of Commissioners are part of the agency. And as long as the Board of Commissioners are operating under the auspices of DCHA, then our authority would also extend to them.
Okay. And when, just in terms of process, whether it's now or in the future, but right now, multiple agencies are involved in the oversight of the Housing Authority. Generally speaking, how do you avoid conflicts in situations like that?
We have close coordination, no matter the work that we're doing. If we're conducting investigative work, we work closely with our investigative partners. If we have external audits going on, we liaise with those external auditors. So any work that's going on within the district, we're usually working closely with those entities. So there is a significant amount of deconfliction that goes on.
Okay. Okay. Those are all the questions I have. Is there anything else that you want to share or that you think would be important for the record before we conclude?
No, the only thing I'll leave you with the committee is it's important for the district to have integrity in its oversight system. The district actually has one of the better offices of Inspector General, and that's because of the legislation that has been put in place by the district. But so where we do find vulnerabilities or gaps, it's important to close those up as quickly as possible, because where there is a gap leaves us open to risks, which leaves us open to misfeasance, malfeasance, fraud, waste, and abuse. So where we find those gaps, obviously, I will report those to the council, and it's important to close those to make sure the district has the proper oversight over all of its agencies and programs.
Great. I appreciate it. I want to thank you for identifying this gap for the council for working with us to address it quickly and permanently. And I think most of us in the city agree that this is an important gap to close and to continue looking for other issues like this in the city. So I think we'll wrap up there. I do just want to mention that if there was anyone who wasn't able to testify but wants to submit testimony for the record, it is welcome and encouraged and will be made part of the official record. So anyone interested can submit additional testimony by email to the Committee on Government Operations and Facilities. Send it to facilities@dccouncil.us, facilities@dccouncil.us. The record for this hearing will close at the close of this on Monday, July 25th. So send testimonies before then. With that, the business before this committee is concluded. The time is now 12:45 p.m. and this roundtable is adjourned. Thanks again, General Lucas.
Thank you, Councilmember.